Chaos during communion, caught on a live stream. It happened Saturday at St. Mary Magdalene Church during a first communion ceremony for 60 children. Saturday's incident comes a week after a man attempted to shoot a Pennsylvania pastor mid-service. Bernard Polite said he heard voices.
You hear this time and again, hearing voices. It is the voice of confusion that the culture needs to get rid of and start listening to the voice of God. Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where we're dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And in this episode, we're going to unpack and try to provide a more pastoral response to the potential massacre that happened in Louisiana, where a young teenager entered into a church when they were having First Communion with 60 children, and he was armed. He was stopped. Thank God. What are we to make of it? And so that's what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, please make sure you click like, subscribe, share, and comment. You know how this helps us to provide more of an outreach so that we can kind of unpack all of these things that are happening in this world, but look at it with a true theological, Catholic, and pastoral point of view. And if you haven't done so, please consider providing us with the support on our Patreon community, because as a member of Patreon, you're going to have access to a lot of great content and some special perks. So let's just jump right into it now with what we're supposed to make of this potential massacre that happened with a teenager with a gun. And what are we supposed to do with it? What does our faith tell us? So I don't want to show these images to you, but I do think that it is very important to be able to look at ugliness in reality. I'm going to show you the live video that I saw from Instagram of what could have potentially been a massacre. Okay. You see here that there was a lot of confusion. This is what, OSV News kind of reports about this really tragic situation. Thankfully, no one died, but it's tragic that we have to get to this point where churches may now have to have guards. But in more detail, this is what we know. At a First Communion Mass at St. Mary Magdalene Catholic Church in Abbeville, Louisiana, on May the 11th, a teenager attempted to enter the church with a rifle. Not a gun, but with a rifle. And parishioners prevented him from entering in where these 60 children were supposed to have received Holy Communion. The associate pastor of St. Mary Magdalene, was seen approaching the priest. His name is Father Dupree, and he asks everyone to be calm. He's leading people in a Hail Mary, and thankfully nothing happened. We believe that the First Communion did not continue, and I can understand why. The real sad part is that we don't exactly know what was the motivation for this young man to enter into the church. There are reports that say that he entered in because he heard voices that the priest needed protection. So interestingly enough, this boy comes in, apparently he was, from what we gather, there to protect the priest. In so doing, created potential harm for so many others, and definitely for himself. Father Dupree basically encouraged everyone to return to church. He said, I'm going back to the safest place on earth, next to his holy cross and his mother. See you all at the 4 p.m. Mass. This is what faith tells us. And I know that this is going to sound very disturbing. But God forbid, had anyone been harmed in that church, that person who had lost their life in church, they would be made a martyr. That's just all there is to it. And we know that evil things like this unfortunately happens. There is another image of how shall we say, the reality of evil that has entered into the church and has created such violence that we forget that this has happened in other parts of the world. So, for example, Reuters reports in 2022 that at least 50 were killed at a massacre at a Catholic church in southwest Nigeria. We don't hear much about that. I mean, it might be a little bit of a blip, but this is because there were young children. There were 60 children there to receive Holy Communion. So what is the church's response to all this? Well, obviously, there's going to be a lot of chatter about having to beef up security in churches, putting armed guards present at churches as a kind of deterrent. I know that there are some churches now that have police cars that are stationed out front. Whether there's a police officer there or not, it's almost as if having a police car, a presence with someone with a gun, can actually help protect people from others who might have a gun as well. Because unfortunately, again, these things happen. And so before we talk about that with the culture, I want to maybe just review a little bit about what the Catholic Church has said in response to the gun violence, which is truly something situationally a problem in the United States. And why? Is it because we have the Second Amendment? No, that should be, I'm going to say it right now. The Second Amendment should be protected at all costs. People should have the right to bear arms. They really should. Should there be some sort of sensible approach to who bears arms? Well, unfortunately, we say the same thing about cars. And people still misuse cars as a weapon. I think more people do die from people operating cars badly than guns. We also have to know that in Australia in April of just 2024, just a couple months ago, that 6 women were murdered because a young man who had mental health issues walked into the mall and stabbed 6 people and injured 12. So is there going to be a ban on knives? And I know that this might seem like I am pro-gun. I'm not. I'm pro-Second Amendment. And why? Because you'll hear about it more in my commentary. It was a cop with a gun that shot the person that had the knife. And it's almost like you prove strength sometimes by force. And it was thankfully the force of the parishioners who were smart enough to see that there was someone with a gun, and certainly that person might have already seemed off. I mean, you don't walk in with a shotgun, with a rifle into church. There's definitely a problem. But talking it out isn't going to stop this person if they were going to do something terrible. It needed force. And so we have to know that violence is never a solution to a problem about violence. You almost have to have the force of critical thinking, which our world does not have a lot of anymore. And there's going to be a lot of emotions wrapped up in this particular situation. And there's going to be a lot of parish councils that are going to be meeting this week and talking about what we need to do. But what we really need to do is strengthen the ability for people to think more clearly. Yes, be prepared. But prepare for what? Prepare to meet Jesus, whether in a good and happy death while someone is asleep and elderly, or unfortunately in a massacre like we have seen endless amounts of, not just in America, but around the world. But in America, it's played up because there are a lot of liberals who would approach, and I say liberals because that's just admitted. I'm not talking about politics, but liberally minded people who want to get away, just do away with all guns whatsoever, that no citizen should have a gun. That's honestly one of the silliest things. I'm going to talk more about that in my commentary, but that's just one of the silliest arguments. We have to approach this with faith. And so in January of 2020, the USCCB put out a document called Backgrounder on Gun Violence, a Mercy and Peace-Building Approach to Gun Violence. Again, this came out in January of 2022. And in the background, it refers to all of the violence that has happened in the United States, particularly surrounding gun violence. And the USCCB's position has always been, quoting Pope Paul VI, if you want peace, work for justice. So for the Catholic Church, this is really rooted in a justice issue, that people sometimes with guns use it in order to achieve what they call a form of justice, or who knows, they just want to be violent. But knowing this, the USCCB has supported the assault weapons ban that was originally passed in 1994, but it expired in 2004. And the USCCB bishops issued a pastoral letter talking about responsibility, rehabilitation, and restoration, a Catholic perspective on crime and criminal justice, and called for people towards a culture of life, to do more to end violence in our homes, and help victims break out of patterns of abuse. And regarding gun violence, it's all what the bishops talk about. We support measures that control the sale and use of firearms and make them safer, especially efforts that prevent their unsupervised use by children or anyone other than the owner. And we reiterate our call for sensible regulation of handguns. So this is kind of what the bishops have asked for. Is that going to solve the problem? I doubt it, because it's really not an issue that deals with faith, but really when culture is devoid of faith. So let's talk about what guns have done in our culture. Guns have been used to show people's strength and power. It's no different from a knife or a big stick, a sword, or in the case of David, a slingshot with a small handful of rocks. There have always been weapons. And the weapons in the hands of good people protect cities, protect families, protect homes, protect themselves. Weapons in the hands of bad people always do violence. We know that Archbishop Romero was a man who spoke out against injustice, and he was murdered by assassination in 1980, March 24th, the vigil of the Annunciation. His last words were, "May God have mercy on the assassin." What we've discovered is the telling reality that unfortunately this violence has perpetuated itself in part because of evil voices in culture. I want you to listen to this CBS News report and hear how tragic culture is without the voice of God.
Chaos during communion, caught on a live stream. It happened Saturday at St. Mary Magdalene Church during a first communion ceremony for 60 children, all second graders, in Abbeville, Louisiana. Police say a 16-year-old boy carrying a gun opened the back door of the packed church, but was immediately confronted and escorted away from the church by parishioners. The priest tries to calm everyone by asking them to recite a prayer, while altar servers can be seen running for cover and clergy ducking behind the altar. No one was hurt. The 16-year-old was arrested and taken for a mental evaluation. Saturday's incident comes a week after a man attempted to shoot a Pennsylvania pastor mid-service. Video captures the moment his gun jams, and the deacon dives over a pew and tackles him.
I just tried to get out of the way of him shooting because he pointed it right at me, and I just see it. I'm looking right down the barrel of a gun.
Bernard Polite said he heard voices. He is now under arrest, charged with murdering his cousin earlier that day.
That's what I think we need to understand, are the voices that perpetuate evil. Guns don't do harm to people just sitting there. It's when it's in the hands of bad people, or people who are confused, people who are mentally confused. And you hear this time and again, hearing voices. And that's the sad part. I think we have to tune out all of the politicians that are going to use this opportunity to either push out a complete ban of all type of guns, or whenever we hear, say, like groups such as the NRA saying that these measures don't work anyway, and they are right, they don't work. Why? Because our culture is devoid of trying to listen to God. When we don't listen to God and we fill our minds up with music that almost celebrates violence, with TV shows that don't celebrate it but are constantly showing it, and also from the entertainment industry, you also bleed into politics. And you see the voices of politicians. They don't want you to have guns, but they will certainly have armed guards around them at all times. You see the hypocrisy here. It is the voice of confusion that the culture needs to get rid of and start listening to the voice of God. And so what I want to do now is kind of jump right into my commentary, because I don't think we are truly paying attention to sensible voices. Sadly, very sadly, this First Communion potential massacre is probably going to scar a lot of people. Again, we're going to see a lot of reactions coming from churches, and there should be a true response. I'm glad to hear that the priest, I think Father Dupree, in one of the counts where you can actually hear more clearly, he was actually praying a Hail Mary. He was leading people to pray, protection for the people and asking the Mother of God's prayers. And then in other video accounts, you hear like maybe the associate pastor or somebody saying for people to remain calm, to be with their children until the police came. And from what I understood, there was swift response. This all comes at the heel of the fact that I was actually in Louisiana at this time, and I had been to Lafayette a number of times to do events there. And it's really just sad to me, for me and for everybody, to know that the most sacred places of all are no longer protected. But that violence begins when we don't value life. When you don't protect the most sacred place, which is the mother's womb, from the sins of abortion, the murderous sins of abortion. When we don't protect safe places in the world like families, because there is such a disregard for life of your own family member. If we can't protect places like churches, which, if you were to go to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, there are not a lot of armed guards there. In fact, I don't remember actually seeing an armed guard there at all. But if you go to the Wailing Wall, where the Jews pray, or to Temple Mount, Dome of the Rock, where the Muslims have a particular space to pray, you've got to go through security. We don't have any of that in the Catholic Church. So will there be reaction? For sure. Is it necessary? Yes. As long as it doesn't get dramatic, because as soon as that happens, you're listening to voices that fill you with fear. And in reality, you can put up guards all over the place, but bad things will sadly happen. I just take a look at, for example, the scandals of the minority, the minuscule percentage of abusive priests. That was a church. Terrible things happened at church. And it's evil, because evil is everywhere. And it's only because we're listening to the wrong voice that doesn't challenge us to do good. And so, what should there be in place? I'm going to recommend that churches just simply train their ushers to pay more attention. Yes, to consider putting on staff someone who, as an off-duty police officer, I've been to many churches where that has been in place. That is a smart thing, for sure. Making sure that there are video cameras so that there is nothing. I put video When I was working in parish, I recommended putting a video camera right where the safe is in the usher's room, a safe in where the altar servers a camera where the altar servers are vested, a camera at the entrances of the church. And so the more we can use technology to help, but we also have to talk to our people and teach them that sadly these things happen. And should that happen, it should not result in us retaliating with anger and with more violence. But thankfully, as this one priest did, with prayer, that can change things. I look at that one situation in Pennsylvania where the guy had a handgun pointed point blank at that pastor who was preaching. And the gun jammed in the same way Bishop Marmari was attacked, but his blade, the attacker's blade, didn't fully open. Had it happened, Bishop Marmari would have been probably killed instantly. And so our response is, work as if things depended on you, but pray as if everything depended on God. All of your measures are not going to protect people completely. So we have to approach this faithfully. Don't listen to the voices that lead you to fear, but voice the voice of God who will help you to think rationally, to think with inspiration, but also to approach this so that we don't fill and react only with fear, but with wisdom. In reality, guns should be placed in the hands of healthy and mentally sane people. But how do you prove that? My gosh, how do you prove that? Well, that's where I think, like if there was a measure, someone should take a psychological test and present those findings before you can purchase a gun. That's just my opinion. I know I'm going to get some people who are truly pro NRA and Second Amendment advocates. I don't want to get rid of the Second Amendment. We need to protect the Second Amendment. My gosh, we've all heard the stories about why Japan doesn't just simply come and conquer the United States during the war. And it's because they said, even we have housewives, mothers with shotguns. Again, that show of strength helps to maintain some level of peace. But can there be some ways to prevent guns from falling into the hands of mentally deranged people? Well, that's what we would want. But remember the Christian school in North Carolina? There was a mentally deranged person, transgender, that nobody wants to talk about, where they killed people because not the guns, but because the gun was in the hands of someone who is mentally deranged. So we've got to create opportunities for people to be more healthy mentally and emotionally. And then I also just want to say that at a time like this First Holy Communion thing really just kind of jarred me, because had anything happened, I think I would have fallen into a form of depression and sadness, and I would have gotten very angry. I'm just being very honest with you. Had anything happened to those children, I would have been spit-firing angry, and I don't know, I wouldn't lose my control, but I would just really feel it. But we need to protect our children at every stage of their life, beginning in the mother's womb. And I think, honestly, abortion, the legalizing of it, the promotion of it, this is where violence begins. And if we don't protect children at that stage, we're never going to protect children when they become like children again as seniors and elderly and just kind of promoting euthanasia. This is the evil of the voices. Thank God I'm going to end this with hope. And end this with hope, because we have to have some hope here. And I got this story from Rome Reports that 8 children made their first Holy Communion in Gaza's only Catholic parish. The image of these children are just so holy and saintly. And in the middle of the war, bombings and attacks in Gaza Strip continue. But this has not kept these 8 children from receiving the sacrament of First Holy Communion. They celebrated on the feast of the baptism of the Lord, surrounded by their family and friends. And even though, again, while there were bombings that took place, these children received communion. I want to give a message to the parents of these first communicants who were there in Louisiana on May 11th. Do not let this deter your faith. Do not let this potential scare deter your faith. Raise your children with greater faith, greater than ever. Teach them that our life is precious and that anything, unfortunately, can happen, but God's fortune will always be on us. Teach them never to fear anything that would prevent them from going to church, because I can tell you that there are going to be forces motivated by the evil one who's going to use this to scare people away from coming to church, because we know that there is a big target on the church, and that there are forces, even by people who profess to be Catholic, at even the highest levels of offices in our land, that do violence to Catholics by their rhetoric, by the promotion of immorality, by the lack of speaking up to protect young children. This is the mentally deranged voices that's creating these confusions, that's creating everyone to hate one another. We need to stop listening to them. Turn more towards prayer. Use the example of these beautiful children in Gaza who didn't let bombs around their city stop them receiving Holy Communion. This is a tough one for me because I love the Eucharist. I want to protect children at all costs. I want to protect the Second Amendment, but I also want to protect sensibility in union with the bishops' voices to make sure that there are sensible, rational, well-thought protections so that bad people do not get access to weapons, and that people who suffer from serious mental health get the help that they need. This is where we are. I'm going to certainly keep those families and this parish in prayer, as well as all churches in prayers. And I hope that this was at least a sensible perspective for you. Please don't overreact. Respond. Respond to the voice of God, to value and protect life at all stages. Thank you for listening. Again, I hope this helps. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. What do you think the church needs to do to protect their churches and their parishioners? What can the church do? Let us know in your comments, and please make sure you support us on Patreon, where you can get access to more content as well as some great perks. But for now, again, prayers assured for you. Thanks for listening. See you next time on the Father Leo Show, where I'm dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And stay hungry for God.